A top-tier hitman was on an assassination mission. Through his scope, a stunning woman appeared. Instinct made him take a second look. He immediately realized that could get him killed. He forced himself to refocus on the target and steady his heart rate. Carl quickly chambered another round, ready to take a follow-up shot, but the bodyguards had already been alerted. The curtains were yanked shut. He only had one chance at the perfect shot, and he'd blown it. Carl swiftly packed up his rifle, picked up the shell casing, threw on his helmet, and jumped on his motorcycle. By the time the sirens started wailing, he had already vanished down a back road. Along the way, he ditched the magazine and his gear and tossed the helmet into a river. Every trace of evidence was completely cleaned up. He walked into a convenience store and used a bathroom break to quickly change clothes. He scrubbed himself down thoroughly, even shaved off his beard. On his way out, he doused himself in cologne. To mask any lingering scent, everything was flawless. Carl hailed a cab and headed straight for the airport. Before going inside, he wiped the prints off his pistol and quietly dropped it in a trash can. At the security checkpoint, a police dog locked eyes with him. Even though he'd left absolutely no trace, Carl made the call to ditch that flight. He ducked into a restroom and wiped down his entire body again, not even leaving the sink untouched, playing it safe. He bought a ticket for a different flight. Just as he was about to board, his boss called, furious, demanding to know why the job failed. Carl knew exactly what this meant. When you miss a hit on a high-profile target, the people who hired you tend to tie up loose ends. Now he was being hunted by both the police and other hitmen. He hung up, immediately pulled out his SIM card, and crushed the phone under his heel to prevent tracking. Even after boarding the plane, he stayed on full alert. He noticed one passenger kept sneaking glances at him. The moment he got off the plane, Carl used a backup identity to book a connecting flight. That same passenger somehow booked the same connection. They even crossed paths again in the terminal. Carl was now certain this guy was tailing him. He immediately changed his flight, checked into an airport hotel, and ordered room service. He only opened the door after confirming it was the hotel staff. He wasn't actually hungry, he just needed a makeshift weapon. Carl propped a glass against the door handle, with a plate underneath it. If anyone pushed the door open, it would make a loud crash. He also took the dinner knife and sat in the dark, completely focused. Luckily, the night passed without incident. The mysterious passenger never showed up again. Carl finally boarded his flight back to the Dominican Republic. His car was still parked outside the airport, but even on the road, he stayed on high alert, constantly switching routes, never letting any car drive alongside him because a gun could come out of any window at any moment. After a full day of detours, Carl finally made it home. The second he reached the front door, something felt off. There were two unfamiliar footprints on the ground, clearly not his wife's shoe size. Next to them was a pile of cigarette butts. Someone had been staking out the place for a long time. This wasn't the work of some common thief. This had a professional killer's signature all over it. Carl understood. He had become the prey. He quickly drew his pistol, hopped the fence into the yard, and used the bushes for cover as he approached the house. He spotted fresh footprints at the front of the house too. Someone had already been inside. Rock music was blaring from the house, but his wife was nowhere to be seen. Carl burst into the bedroom. The place was torn apart. Blood was splattered across the walls. He immediately called his wife and learned she'd been seriously injured and rushed to the hospital. It turned out that while she was home alone, a man and a woman had broken in. They attacked her without hesitation, slashing her across the head. Thomas quickly told Carl that the two attackers were absolutely brutal. Once they saw his sister was barely clinging to life, they hopped into a green taxi and took off. Carl immediately transferred his wife to a private hospital. Then he went back home and dug up the lawn. As a top-tier hitman, he had buried a stash of emergency gear at the house. His wife had no idea any of it existed. Carl grabbed the weapons he needed and changed into a casual tourist outfit. He hit the streets, specifically looking for green taxis. When he found the right one, he didn't rush out of the car. He just quietly noted the taxi company's name. Later that night, when the streets were empty, he snuck into the company's office, pretending he had an urgent matter and knocked on the door. The moment the manager opened up, Carl stepped back, pulled a stocking mask over his face, raised his gun, and shot him dead. Carl then entered the office and quickly went through every taxi's trip log. He found one vehicle that had been near his house 2 days ago. Carl closed out the search and used the vehicle info to track down the driver. Now he had every key piece of the puzzle, but to cover his real motive, Carl deliberately trashed the entire office and scattered some cash around to make it look like a robbery. Only then did he slip away. The next day, Carl staked out the garage entrance. He watched the driver, Dylan, pull out in that green taxi and immediately followed him. After tailing him for a while, Carl got out ahead of him, posed as a passenger, and flagged Dylan down. He gave a fake address. Dylan was focused on driving, completely off guard. Then Carl suddenly pulled out his gun. Dylan froze in terror. He frantically handed over his wallet, begging for his life. Carl had zero interest in that. He asked directly about the passengers, who had chartered a ride near his house 2 days ago. Dylan remembered them clearly. It was a man and a woman. The man was extremely overweight. The woman woman was drop-dead gorgeous. They had just gotten off a private jet and hired him to drive straight to a secluded home deep in the woods. They came out an hour later and rushed back to the airport. Dylan never asked a single question, so he had no clue what they'd done inside. Even though Dylan had told him everything, the more you talk, the faster you die, Carl still didn't know who these two were, but his boss Marcus definitely did, because in their entire circle, only Marcus knew his home address. Carl immediately used a fake ID to board a flight to New Orleans. He had 6 storage units hidden around the city, packed with weapons and equipment. He grabbed a pistol, 2 spare rounds, and a fresh passport. He also picked a license plate from a stash and put it on. Now, aside from the live ammunition, everything about him, head to toe, was a fake identity. His boss, Marcus, lived in a high-security apartment building. Entry required facial recognition. Carl's only option was to disguise himself as a janitor and wait outside for an opportunity. Soon, a delivery guy swiped in through the door. Carl quickly followed behind, pulling a trash bin with him. The delivery guy got off the elevator on the 4th floor. Carl stepped out right behind him. Because Marcus lived on the 4th floor, the delivery guy swiped through the security door. Carl silently started counting. He figured out the door auto-locked after 7 seconds, so he had to slip through within that window. When he saw a door open and someone sign for the package, Carl walked up and peeked inside. The person signing was Marcus's secretary. Just a second before the delivery guy came back out, Carl pretended to take a drink from a nearby faucet. The delivery guy left without a second thought. Carl started his count again and rushed in at the very last second to catch the door. He left the trash bin outside and slipped in with just his gun and a toolbox. The secretary saw Carl and nearly passed out from shock, but she wasn't his target. Marcus was. Carl pulled out a rope and had the secretary tie Marcus to a chair first. Then he had her tie herself up in the bathroom. When Carl closed the door, he deliberately left it cracked so he could keep an eye on her at all times. Marcus poses as a lawyer on the surface, but he's actually the man running a secret assassination business behind the scenes. Carl's wife was beaten within an inch of her life, and someone placed that order through Marcus. 2 days earlier, Carl had botched an assassination on a wealthy businessman. The client was furious and put in another order, this time to send Carl a brutal warning to make sure he doesn't screw up next time. Carl was desperate to find out who the client was, but Marcus stuck to his professional code and refused to say a word. Carl pulled out a nail gun and aimed it right at him. Marcus changed his tune real quick, saying the client info was on his computer. Carl wasn't buying it. He fired 3 steel nails straight into Marcus's chest. If they weren't removed within 6 minutes, he'd suffocate to death. Marcus still tried to act tough, claiming he'd rather die than give up a client, but barely 3 minutes in, the pain brought him crashing to the floor. Carl quickly grabbed a newspaper and slid it under Marcus to catch the blood, making sure not to leave any traces. But Marcus didn't even make it to 6 minutes. He had a sudden heart attack and dropped dead on the spot. Carl stayed ice cold. He wheeled in a dumpster from outside and stuffed Marcus's body inside. The scene was wiped completely clean. He opened the bathroom door. The secretary was curled up in a ball, too terrified to make a sound. She immediately dropped to her knees and begged for her life.
I have the names you're looking for. I know who they were.
Carl let her live. For now, he pushed the body-filled dumpster into the elevator, and she followed him in. 2 other people stepped into the elevator, but the secretary kept her mouth shut tight. Not a single cry for help. She knew all too well how ruthless Carl was. One wrong move, and she was dead. The secretary took Carl back to her place. She dug out the contract that had been placed on Carl's life. On the back of the order were 2 phone numbers. The account holders were Mike and Anna. Another document clearly listed all the details of the person who placed the order, Edward. Carl finally had the key lead he'd been looking for. The secretary thought cooperating would save her life, but the moment she started walking down the stairs, Carl made his move and snapped her neck without hesitation. From the outside, it looked exactly like an accidental fall. Carl then dragged Marcus's body back to his own warehouse. He stuffed the corpse into a barrel full of acetic acid and sank it to the bottom of the ocean. Carl cleaned the car, swapped out the plates again, and officially set out on his hunt for Mike. Rather than being someone else's prey, Carl was far more comfortable being the ruthless hunter. After arriving at his destination, Carl rented a car under a fake identity. He scoped out Mike's neighborhood first and noticed Mike had a vicious guard dog, so he immediately picked up a fresh steak, some powerful sleeping pills, and malt liquor. When night fell, Carl crept toward Mike's house. The dog picked up on the stranger right away and started barking like crazy. Carl tossed the steak, soaked in malt liquor and laced with sleeping pills. The dog scarfed it down greedily. Carl strolled right in through the front door. Seeing the dog totally out cold only made him more confident, but the second he stepped into the room, Mike lunged out from the shadows. Carl was caught completely off guard and took a vicious beating. He couldn't even fight back. Mike was terrifyingly jacked, clearly a professional-level killer. In a straight-up brawl, Carl didn't stand a chance. He quickly grabbed an iron hook from the bedside and drove it deep into Mike's muscle, but Mike was tough as nails. He powered through the searing pain and managed to grab his gun. Carl couldn't hold up against firepower. He bolted into the next room and found a hidden pistol under the bed. The moment Mike appeared in the doorway, Carl pulled the trigger and took him down for good. The gunshot woke up the gluttonous guard dog. realizing it had failed its duty, it charged into the room, consumed with guilt. Seeing its owner lying in a pool of blood, the dog let out a deep, mournful whimper and lunged at Carl in a frenzy, just as those razor-sharp fangs were about to reach him. Carl rolled out of the house with lightning speed. He immediately lit a torch and hurled it inside. Raging flames swallowed the entire house in seconds. The dog was the only witness, but Carl knew it would never take the stand against him. Carl cleaned himself up thoroughly in the airport bathroom. He changed into fresh clothes and continued on to hunt down Anna. After locking onto her location, he tailed her closely and found her on a date with her boyfriend at a restaurant. Carl walked right in without hesitation. He knew the rule all too well. When a woman is murdered, the first suspect is always her husband or boyfriend. That little psychological trick gave him all the cover he needed. When Anna's boyfriend stepped away to the restroom, Carl sat down across from her and flashed his gun. Anna froze instantly, completely paralyzed in her seat. She knew she wasn't making it out alive tonight. She only asked to finish her last meal. Carl agreed. Then Anna asked if she could go for a walk, a romantic final stroll. At the end of her life, Carl didn't give her that chance. He pulled the trigger and ended it right there, quick and clean. That was always Carl's style. After taking out two fellow assassins back to back, even Carl felt a twinge of something. Mike and Anna risked their lives hunting him down, thinking they were the ones doing the killing. But didn't they end up getting killed all the same? Still, Carl's revenge was far from over. Mike and Anna were just the hired guns. The real person who ordered the hit, Edward, was the true mastermind. Edward was a top-tier billionaire in Chicago. He traveled exclusively in armored luxury cars and lived in a heavily guarded high-rise apartment. Carl couldn't get anywhere near him directly. He had to wait for the driver to leave, and in the split second before the garage door fully closed, he slipped inside. He tried to enter the apartment building through the garage stairwell, but the door was locked from the inside. Carl snapped a close-up photo of the lock. He used an electronic key duplicator to place a remote order for a perfectly matched key. The very next day, the duplicated key was delivered to Carl. He followed Edward to a fitness club. As he passed by a janitor, Carl reached for the keys. His hand got caught on his sleeve, but he played it off like nothing happened. Using that brief moment, he successfully swiped the keys. Carl walked into the locker room and used the stolen keys to open Edward's locker. He pulled a key card from a coat pocket and made an exact copy on the spot. Once that was done, Carl left the club immediately. He entered the building through the garage, unlocked the side door with the key he'd prepared in advance, then swiped the copied key card and broke into Edward's apartment. When Edward saw Carl suddenly standing there, he assumed it was a robbery. Carl pulled out the assassination contract and held it up for Edward to see. That's when it hit Edward. Carl was the very hitman he'd hired to kill the businessman. When he heard the job had failed, Edward didn't even get angry. The one who really turned up the pressure was Carl's boss, Marcus. Marcus deliberately reminded Edward that for just another $150,000, he could make the whole problem disappear. He guaranteed it would never be traced back to Edward. So Edward wired another $150,000. As for how Marcus would handle the rest, Edward didn't want to know. Only then did Carl finally understand the full truth. The reason Marcus refused to give up Edward's name, even at the cost of his life, wasn't because he feared Edward. The person who truly wanted to send Carl that deadly warning was Marcus himself. If Carl had found out about Edward, he would have been killed even faster and far more brutally. Seeing the whole picture clearly now, Carl didn't lay a finger on Edward. He knew Edward would never be stupid enough to cross a killer who could walk into his home anytime he pleased. After surviving this harrowing ordeal, Carl had a complete awakening. The world of assassins is exactly this cruel. Hunter and prey can switch places at any moment. He decided to wash his hands of it all and leave the business for good. All he wanted was a quiet, ordinary life with his wife, but the killer's instinct was already carved into his bones. Even lying on the beach in sunglasses, Carl never truly closed his eyes. That's all for today's movie breakdown. If you enjoyed my narration, please like and subscribe.